Acts chapter 6. We're into the story of Stephen. There were a group of men, Jewish men, from the synagogue of the freedmen. And these were men, again, I said it last time, but I'll remind you that it wasn't possible, wasn't permitted to have a synagogue in a town or city until there were 12 Jewish men who could be the founders of the synagogue. So we know there was at least 12 of these guys. And Luke gives us kind of a sense of the cosmopolitan nature of this synagogue. They were Jews. This is in verse 9. There were Jews of Cyrene and Alexandria, as well as the provinces of Cilicia and Asia. That's pretty big. If you drew a circle on a map, that's no small area that these guys' homes covered. The circle. Well, okay. And they began to debate with Stephen, but they couldn't keep up. They couldn't answer his arguments. So then in verse 11, this often happens. Not to this degree, thank God, but it often happens that when a person or a group are unable to answer the arguments of another person or group, they resort to really, frankly, irrational reactions. That's what these guys did in verse 11. Then they secretly persuaded some men to say, "We have heard Stephen speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God." Well, what that means is they convinced some men to lie about Stephen. Now, in our culture, the idea of blasphemy is, when's the last time you heard it come up in conversation? Usually it comes up in kind of a sort of a jest, like, "Why, that's blasphemy." Well, no, that's not blasphemy. So what is blasphemy? Well, it is attributing something evil or negative or even unacceptable to God. And the Jews were very serious about blasphemy. Now, keep thinking and reflecting a little bit into the Gospels, and one of the things that, the straw that broke the camel's back, I guess, for the Jews, and this was what they used to go to capital punishment with Jesus, is that he had claimed to be equal with God, to be the Son of God, and that was blasphemy. And for the Jew, according to Jewish law, that was deserving of death. The most common way that was done was through stoning. So what these guys from the synagogue of the freedmen were, essentially they were going to have Stephen murdered. It was an absolute total kangaroo court. So verse 12, so they stirred up the people and the elders and the teachers of the law. See, they had to get these guys involved before they could pull off their scheme. They seized Stephen and brought him before the Sanhedrin. Now, this is not the first time we encounter the Sanhedrin. It isn't there's not a direct relationship between the Sanhedrin and our Congress, but that's probably as close as we're going to come to a simile there, that they truly are a little bit similar in that they were the governing bodies. All right. Why, again, they had to bring Stephen in before the Sanhedrin is because that was the group who could adjudicate and who could condemn to death because of blasphemy. Now, and this is a double weird thing to me. When they brought Jesus to Pilate, Pilate said, I don't find anything wrong with Jesus. Go, do what you're going to do. And they said, we can't put him to death. That's what he deserves. But we can't do that. Only you can. Now here, I don't have a good explanation for why, other than there was such hatred and such, you'll find these two things generally joined at the hip: hatred and pride. And both of these were present for the Jews, the I'm going to call them unbelieving Jews. They disbelieved, not that they just didn't believe, but they disbelieved in Jesus. Well, verse 13, I believe the antecedent for that, they is the men from the synagogue of the freedmen. They produced false witnesses who testified, this fellow never stopped speaking against this holy place and against the law. For we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and change the customs Moses handed down to us. I mean, that's a bald-faced lie. We don't have there's no record of what Stephen taught and preached. We do have the record that Stephen performed miraculous signs and wonders. We don't know what he preached. The other apostles, they preached that Jesus was the Messiah, the promised anointed one, the Son of God. This was a lie. It amazes me always how prone humanity is to believe lies when their emotions are stirred. See, I don't think that these false witnesses just, gave this factual testimony. I think they were all worked up. And, when they introduced the idea that this place, meaning, first of all, the temple, which for the Jew was the center of the universe, not just the center for their worship. Secondly, this place would have been all of Judaism, and that was a big threat. Because he said that this was what they said they heard Stephen say, that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and change the customs Moses handed down to us. In other words, he was discrediting, tearing down what their lives had been built around for millennia. The customs Moses handed down to us. Well, verse 15, all who were sitting in the Sanhedrin looked intently at Stephen, and they saw that his face was like the face of an angel. wonder what that means. I wonder how that looked. I've never seen an angel. When I read about angels in the Bible, Old and New Testament, evidently in those instances they had taken on the form of human beings. And in all the cases, the form of men, males. What their face looked like, we don't get a clue. But here's my best guess, if it matters. When they looked intently at Stephen, there's a reason why they looked intently at Stephen. It's because his face reflected I don't know what to call it, almost divinity. At least a serenity. Angels were unmoved. They didn't, they didn't get all worked up in any of the instances where they appear in both the Older and the Newer Testaments. I think he looked at peace, untroubled. There's a possibility that there was some kind of physical radiance, but could have. I don't know that it was. Well, it got the attention of everybody at the Sanhedrin. However, it didn't change their tactics. We're on to chapter 7, verse 1. Then the high priest asked Stephen, Are these charges true? And then Stephen, he basically, this was Peter's pattern as well, but Stephen launches into not a defense, but a sermon. Brothers and fathers, listen to me. Okay, had their attention. And, okay, he goes on. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham while he was still in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran. Leave your country and your people, God said, and go to the land I will show you. We have that recorded for us in the book of Genesis. Now, a little bit of a spoiler alert here. Stephen is going to give them a concise history of the Jews, which everybody in that room, everyone on the Sanhedrin, could recite not just the flow of the story, but they could recite the actual verses that the story was contained in. And the reason I know this is because it was the tradition that have your bar mitzvah as a Jewish boy at about age 13, you had to be able to quote these verses. They were very serious about not just knowing, but having full command of the narrative, the biblical narrative committed to memory. So it's not like Stephen was introducing new information to him. And at first, I think they would have all been nodding. He's done his homework. This is good. Next time, we'll pick it back up and see the rest of the story. This is perhaps one of the best places for anyone to go to get a thumbnail sketch of the broad picture, big picture of Jewish origins and life. And we'll come back to that next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.